I am Dr. Kim Kelley, Montgomery College's Vice President and Provost for the Rockville campus, which includes oversight of the college's early care and training and degree programs. Thank you for joining us today for another in our Workforce of Tomorrow series, where you can hear from experts about current and future workforce needs of our county and state. As one of the college's senior academic leaders, my role is to make sure our students are prepared with education and skills that make them ready for in-demand jobs or to transfer. Today, we want to talk about one specific workforce that affects every residence in our county: early care and education. The college works to fuel our community with ready ECE workers, teachers in child care settings and classrooms. And as we know, in Montgomery County and in Maryland and our nation, early care and education as providers as an industry sector has been devastated as a result of the pandemic. To recover and rebound from the consequences of this public health crisis, our community will need to find ways to build back to the ECE sector for the sake of our children and our economy. The robust ECE sector ensures residents can get back to work and children are ready to learn. ECE teachers working in child care settings need to be prepared with the appropriate education and training so they can make sure our youngest residents are kindergarten ready and we can close the achievement gap. With all of this in mind, it is my pleasure to welcome Myrna Peralta and Lacey Egerton, two guests who are deeply engaged in the critically important issue of developing the early care and education workforce. Welcome to you both today. A little about Ms. Peralta. Myrna Peralta is the Executive Director of CentroNía, a nationally recognized educational organization that provides affordable, quality early childhood education, professional development to educators, and bilingual family support services to more than 2,400 low-income children and families in D.C. and Maryland. Again, welcome, Myrna Peralta. And she is joined this afternoon by Lacey Egerton, who serves as the Director of the Child Care Resource Network for the Maryland Family Network, a statewide organization that provides training opportunities for child care professionals in Maryland and advocates for state and national policies that strengthen the early care and education community and expand the availability of ECE. Welcome, Lacey. Now, let me thank you both for your vital work and for joining me today. All right, so let's get started with the important role that quality, affordable early care and education plays in our communities. Across the spectrum, from left to right, from the Brookings Institute to the American Enterprise Institute, all agree on the value of ECE. Here in Montgomery County and in Maryland, we too understand that early care and education is a critical component of our economy. So my first question to you is, can you help us to better understand the many connections between early care and education and the role that it plays in our county and state's economy? Why is it so important? And Lacey, let's start with you.
Certainly. So I think we certainly knew prior to COVID, but it has made it very apparent that in order for parents to work and truly be productive employees, they have to know that their children are in a setting where they will be safe and where they will learn. And in order for us to achieve those quality settings, those quality childcare programs, it's critically important that our providers are receiving the training, the education, access to quality materials, strong childcare regulations and licensing. All of these things come together to create those environments where parents feel they can safely leave their children, that they will live and learn and play and have an excellent day while their parents are at work. We know statistically that in the state of Maryland, there are more than 400,000 women who have children under the age of 6. And if we want these women to join and stay in the workforce, them having access to quality childcare is essential. And it certainly also has to be affordable. And this is where our businesses and certainly our state and local governments can assist with that. We know that there are trends with competitive workforces and employers offering help with childcare. We know there are tax credits, but all of these components are important in order for our families to have access to the care that they need. When we asked employers last year, and back in 2016, in fact, what the economic impact would be of the absence and turnover caused to childcare issues for our workers in Maryland, they actually said it added up to $2.41 billion in extra costs. And that's just an incredible sum of money, and it all hinges back on quality, affordable childcare settings. We certainly know that when children are in these quality settings, they are better prepared to enter kindergarten and learn, and it creates that love of learning, our lifelong learners, which become our future workforce. In fact, we know that the first 5 years are critical to a child's education, to their development, and it lasts long into adulthood. And if they don't have access to the quality childcare settings, many of them struggle later in life with their education, and they are also more likely to earn more over the course of their lifetime if they've had access to quality care at the beginning. It's also, I think, worth noting that when we talk about the professional development of our educators, in public school settings, teacher professional development is generally covered by the school or district. And in Maryland, unless a provider is participating in a very specific program, they actually have limits on how much support they can get for their training and professional development. So there's such a critical need to focus on providing our early care and education community and workforce access to those critical education and professional development opportunities.
Absolutely, Lacey. I think that's really important. I think that's why, for example, Montgomery College is offering scholarships and alternative and flexible capabilities so that you can take your classes anytime, and we'll help you pay for it through our early childhood initiative so you can come back and you can get that education. And of course, you used a critical word. You said lifelong learners. And that, of course, is music to my ears. But I'm sure we have more that we can hear from Myrna Peralta on this issue. So let me ask you, Myrna, would you like to respond as well?
Yeah, let me first of all just underscore everything that Lacey said. From the 10,000-foot viewpoint, Montgomery County, and I want to sort of put this on the table. The county exec and the county council have really stepped up in significant ways to during this pandemic, and I think moving forward to make sure that the demand and the availability of slots get closer together. In our region here, we probably have 2 slots for every 10 that are needed, and so the demand is huge. And I want to just recognize that Montgomery County has, in partnerships with organizations like ours and others, are really taking this challenge on. On a family basis, I think it's important to recognize that child care and the availability of high quality child care is a real incentive for young families who are looking to move into this region. And I think that everybody recognizes that. It's not something that is, I think, commonly thought about. But as young families are looking at where do we move to, where do we raise our children, raise our families, high quality child care is an important consideration. I think for our families also, child care is a stabilizing factor. It is difficult to plan and think beyond, tomorrow if I don't know what I'm going to do with my children on a day-to-day basis. And so that stabilizing factor is huge. I think during the pandemic, the availability of quality child care has really been an important factor for our essential workers. I think one of the real disappointing realities is that child care is not viewed as an essential service, and that needs to change, because without us, those essential workers then don't have the wherewithal to report to work, and to let go of their concerns about where is my child, while I'm here trying to do the important work of serving my community. And I think the last point I would make is that, just like Lacey said, childcare is the first building block of an educated workforce. And because it is at this important developmental stage that children develop a love of learning. And if we do our jobs right as providers, then those children do better in school and commit to an education that ultimately feeds into an economy in our communities that thrives.
I think those are excellent points. I think both you and Lacey really emphasize that the early child care is so important and such a building block, as you said, Myrna, such a foundation for future training, education, a love of learning, as you mentioned, and that opposite side that you spoke about, which is so important, which is the educator and making sure that they have what they need, and further, that it's great for current workers and our essential workers because they need it now. And they want their children to have a great education. And we want them to have great child care providers who are well educated as well in our county. So as you talked about that, that's a really great point about the importance to the essential worker, the importance of child care. And in addition, there are gaps in our early care and education workforce because of the pandemic. And the Kirwan Commission's blueprint for the future calls for universal pre-K in Maryland to create an even greater activity. But you're mentioning here the importance of ECE in our economy. So let's talk a little bit about the current state of early care and education for the workforce. And we know that the pandemic has wreaked havoc for many industry sectors, and it took a terrible toll on our early care and education providers in particular. Knowing that, and having talked about the importance of a well-educated workforce and professional development, will you tell us a little bit about your take on early care and education as a business sector as a result of the pandemic? And in this time, let's switch it. Myrna, would you like to go first and share your perspective?
Sure. So I'm going to push back a little bit on the term business sector.
Sure.
And only because I think that child care is much more of a essential community service. While we employ and have to for purposes of efficiencies and operations use good business practices, seeing us and responding to early child care as an essential community service, I think goes a long way in helping us think about the needs of the sector. So pre-pandemic, my job as a provider and those of us who are in this business was to, always dealing with how do we keep our doors open, how do we keep our children safe, and how do we keep our staff strong. The pandemic has threatened all of those. And that is the challenge every day for us providers, understanding that the staffing emergency that was thrust on us, the fixed expenses that weren't going away, and the uncertainty of revenue that hangs over us. All of those were exacerbated and brought into the light of day in a way that I think has surprised many people. It wasn't a surprise to those of us who do this work every day. This is not a sector that is rich in profits. We live on margins that are almost non-existent in many ways. Too many of us pre-COVID, live day to day, month to month, because of the financial constraints of this business. And we live and die by regulatory mandates that are essential, but that place greater burdens on us without the commensurate revenue sources. And so all of that, the pre-pandemic realities of childcare were just dragged into this pandemic period and basically have resulted in some providers imploding, others trying to figure out how do we keep the damage at bay, while still committing to high quality childcare. And so the pandemic didn't so much as open our eyes as it, put dynamite underneath us.
Right, and you really emphasize the whole issue that the pandemic uncovered in the tight margins in something that you're really making a great point, which is a community necessity, an economic necessity, but a business sector that has seen great stress. So, Lacey, following up on Ms. Peralta's comments, did you want to share anything about your perspective on that question?
I really want to take Myrna and just go put her in front of people that need to hear us, because that needs to be bottled and put her in front of all the people. I think I'm always hesitant to say anything good has come out of COVID, so please don't take this that way. But the one thing I've seen, I feel like, in our early care and education community is that people are finally paying attention to us. For entirely too long as a society, the ECE workforce has not been supported, has not been recognized as a group of professionals, has not been, to Myrna's point, recognized as essential to any part of the economy, kind of that unseen, unspoken hero sort of thing. And I don't think it could not have become more obvious than during COVID that childcare is the linchpin in any economy. If parents cannot have their children go somewhere safe, especially during a pandemic, they can't safely go to work themselves. And I think some of the things we saw happening with our ECE community and our workforce, spending money on their own masks, air filtration improvements, building improvements to create smaller spaces with smaller cohorts to decrease the likelihood of transmission, purchasing the extra cleaning supplies. There is no other education community in the country where teachers have been told you have to supply your own cleaning. They brought in extra janitors, they brought in extra maintenance staff, and this just really elevated and highlighted that this group of professionals have not been treated as professionals. I think we are finally truly acknowledging that they are educators, they are professionals, they are teachers. You mentioned Kerwin, they need to be respected, compensated, treated like that. I think what we've also now seen, and certainly one of the pieces I feel like many of us in the supporting of the provider side are really focused on, is finding ways to support their business sustainability and their business development skills, that because it's not been recognized as a business, no one thought they needed business skills. And that's such an opportunity and a real recognition by so many of us that this is what they need to make sure that if something like this happens again, they are not left kind of standing on this island by themselves with no support. And to Myrna's point, those razor thin margins just did not leave any wiggle room when there were closures.
Right, and particularly not also for the families that needed the care or the caregivers who wanted to provide it but simply could not afford to continue to deliver that service. I've heard that quite a few times. You made a very good point about the workforce and thinking about it more systematically and thinking about this as a set of professionals. And you did mention, of course, the Kerwin Commission. Now they're calling for pre-K in Maryland, which will create actually an even larger need for an early care and education workforce. So at Montgomery College, of course, we want to help with that problem. We want to solve that problem. And as we prepare early care and education providers and teachers, we'd like you to help us think about the needs for building this early care and education workforce. So my next question, following up on your comments about the professionalism, the educator, and their importance, when you're looking at these immediate disruptions in early care caused by the pandemic, and then these long-term needs that have been created by the call for universal pre-K, what additional skills do you think may be needed? And how could the training and education providers accommodate those realities? Lacey, did you want to take that one first?
I mean, I think I started to touch on it, but this need to really recognize childcare as a business and help them learn and build business development and sustainability skills. We learned from top to bottom during the pandemic that family providers, center owners, center directors had never really been prepared to run a business. And while it is an educational setting, it is a care setting, it is a business that requires budgets and bank accounts and the ability to apply for grants and all these pieces that, all these great state and federal programs came out, like the Payroll Protection Act. And so many providers had never had to engage in those state or federal business fields and truly were unprepared and ill-prepared to step into that arena. Our child care resource centers were astounded at some of the supports they needed to provide because it had just never really been on anyone's radar. So I know number one for us has been business development and sustainability. We actually have a pilot going on right now with 60 family child care providers where we are just focused on helping them learn business, marketing, all of those items and those skills that I don't think we had all realized previously really needed our time and attention. I know the other piece that has really come to the forefront and was sort of starting at the start of the pandemic, but really got the time and the spotlight it needed, was this emphasis on equity. We have also learned during the pandemic that programs were closing disproportionately in certain communities, communities that were not getting access to the healthcare that they needed, to the supports they needed for their staff. And so I think we've also seen a real need to elevate and talk about equity in education, and especially equity in early care and education. And the B3 projects under Pritzker is such a great example of how that is also finally being elevated and talked about and brought to the forefront of these conversations.
Well, that's great. I think the whole concept of being business savvy as well as having the skills needed to be a great teacher or early educator are clearly necessary. And I think you're right. The pandemic has really emphasized that. And of course, we don't want any kind of equity gaps in the delivery of early care because those communities need early care more and as much and definitely need a safe place for their children to go. So thank you for bringing that point forward. Myrna, did you want to follow up and provide your perspective?
Yeah, there are a couple of points I would make. And I think, Dr. Kelley, you mentioned it earlier, which is the flexibility that's required for workforce development. As a provider, if I have staff who want to enroll in some continuing education or who need to go for their AA or their BA, if I have to allow them time off work, I need to replace that with somebody. And too many of us have to rely on temporary services that, double the cost of that individual for that day. And so the realities of scheduling for continuing education is a real issue for providers. But I want to make one really important point, and that is we have to find a way to recognize the value of current skills. I think that the push to professionalize childcare is an important one. I think that's how we get to high quality in many ways, but I think that we we risk losing some of the value added that comes from staff who have been with us 10, 15, 20 years, and who are loved by their children, loved by the parents, who do understand development of the very young, but who are not in a position to go back to school. We have a workforce that is dominated by women, and especially women of color, and who also have their own children, who go home to take care of their own families in the evenings. And I think that the academia needs to figure out how do we support these women who constitute the majority of the folks in early child care, and that the emphasis on the academic needs to, I think, shift a little bit into sort of emphasis on career development. We've had multiple experiences of staff who have signed up for some of the required credentialing in Maryland, and they've really struggled. And it's tough. I mean, and it's a rigorous curriculum, and they've walked away from the field because they, a 50-year-old trying to, figure out Praxis and some of the other is really hard. And
yeah, I totally agree with that. I would just share with you, shameless plug moment, that we do non-credit and credit, and our non-credit does not require the Praxis initially. And also we offer it, it's a bilingual program.
Yeah. But the state requires.
Yes, the state requires. And we have not yet found.
Teachers. Yeah.
Right. And so early child care educators, we can get them very far. We call it stackable credentials. We can get them there. We can get them professionalized, but we also have to work with the requirements. And I would agree with you.
Yeah.
We need multiple pathways to the same outcome that do recognize what the person brings to the table, and that experience you mentioned, Myrna, of being well experienced, which should definitely count for a lot.
And I think that part of the policy conversation also has to be, while we are requiring more credentialing, more rigorous academic preparation, we are not, as a society, matching that up with compensation levels that reward that kind of vigorous academic preparation. And so if you don't marry those two, okay, and you have to, then there's no incentive for folks to get that credentialing or that licensing that the state requires, because there's nothing at the other end that says you will be rewarded financially, or if you are, it's only because your provider has figured out a way to rob Peter to pay Paul, right?
Right.
And so at the policy level, those two have to be married. The requirements for licensing and workforce development with the commensurate compensation.
Absolutely. And I think you and Lacey have both made an excellent point about the professionalization and the recognition of how important this is to our economy. And therefore, it's worthy of financial recognition to make it worthwhile to meet those professional goals. So thank you for bringing that to the forefront. And I wish we had another 25 minutes to talk about it, because these are important points. I hope we'll be able to talk about them again. As we wrap up this, I just want to thank you, Myrna Peralta, for having given your insights and sharing your experience. Lacey, you as well. I appreciate your knowledge and experience from the child care sector and your advocacies on behalf of the early care and education professionals. Both of you provided wonderful insights, and I think gave us a great deal to think about, bringing to light the importance of quality and affordable early care and education for our community, the importance of early care and education for our economic well-being and health, and the importance of it to encourage lifelong learning and to have an economic benefit for the future for the students who have the benefit of early care and education when they are between 1 and 5. I think you've also helped us consider the need to build the early care and education workforce so we can take down barriers to make sure all kids are kindergarten ready and become skilled talent. And of course, we do not have gaps in the availability or equity issues. So I want to thank you for sharing your thoughts and your time and just ask you before we close for this particular event. Myrna, do you have any closing comments? And then Lacey, I'll come back to you.
I have a whole list of comments. But let me end with two thoughts. One is that employers are really important to the workforce development, and we don't have the time here to talk more about that. Montgomery moving forward and some others have recognized this and are working with businesses and employers to figure out, what is their role and responsibility in a healthy and viable child care system. And my other point is to reinforce the thought that workforce development can't just be a term of art. It really has to reflect those who actually deliver the work day in and day out, and those are women and women of color. And so as Montgomery County or Montgomery College looks at how it engages in this workforce development, that the systems it puts together and what it does really is targeted to who does the work day in and day out.
Right. I think that's an excellent point because it's so important to understand who you serve. With your education and who is it who will provide and make that difference in that sector. So thank you. And what about you, Lacey? Any last thoughts?
Again, I just want to elevate what Myrna said a little bit here. This whole piece about the alternative pathways and recognizing what these providers already brought to the table and capitalizing on that. But I think what I would like to end with is kind of that reminder for all of us that at the end of all of these conversations are a bunch of small children, a bunch of small humans who are relying on the big humans to get them ready for the world that they will have to enter at various times, when they're 5 or 6 going into their kindergarten classroom and later high school and hopefully on to bigger and better things. And I think the more we remind ourselves to serve the small humans by way of the big humans, the more we will actually get everyone where we want them to be. We want our children in quality care. We want our teachers to be well cared for and compensated. And when we put those two together, we truly will create a comprehensive early care and education system that is quality, affordable.
I think that's wonderful. I think that we always need to remember, as we say, our student, and to focus on the little person or the big person throughout the lifespan who we serve. So thank you for reminding us of that point. And I want to thank you both for being with us today and joining us on our Workforce of Tomorrow series and this valuable conversation about developing early care and education workforce and early care and education for our youngest learners. I hope you'll join us next time, and I want you to take care and be well. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.